if that tells you anything. So, circumstances surrounding her death remain murky and controversial, but we can agree that that in dying so young, that so mysteriously her talent was denied a proper legacy. In 1981, her death was classified as an accident and a probable drowning in the ocean. The prominent LA coroner, Thomas Goichi, cited in his report numerous bruises to the arm. Welcome back to the True Crime Lounge podcast here on Spotify and YouTube. I do have a YouTube channel that you can go check out as well. Um, I also have a Patreon that you can join for early access episodes scheduled to come out. I also have a merch shop for all your true crime gear. I know there's some true crime lovers out there, so you know this is where you want to go. For any updates on my channel or podcast, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. With that being said, why don't we dive into the reason you clicked on this episode, shall we? Now, we started really talking about the unknown details of the Natalie Wood case in part two. Let's dive into some more details, shall we? Um, the last words that Darvin heard him say to Natalie were, "Get off my effing boat." He revised the police statement, and Darvin and it said that RJ refused to let him turn on the searchlights to look for Natalie. The striations that Franco saw on her body at the autopsy are consistent with the possibility that Natalie tried to hoist herself onto the dinghy from the water. Someone, Franco said, was pushing her down and wouldn't let her stay on. Franco believes that the LA coroner's office covered up the true cause of Natalie Wood's death. Whatever they decided was what wasn't going to be questioned. So, Alan Alan Abbott and Haas Mortuary handled the transportation for Natalie Wood for Westwood's mortuary. The morticians who embalmed Natalie's body bore witness literally to a cover-up that he reported in the 2016 book. Natalie, Albert wrote, was dressed in a huge fur coat and was covered in bruises for which she had hit the rocks that they chose to coat so that the bruising wouldn't be visible. Wood now refers to Natalie's death as a murder. She sees thinking about Guy McElrain, the powerful Hollywood agent who represented her sister. A few days later, after Natalie drowned, McElrain dropped by to see Lana. He just been to RJ's house, and he said to RJ, and RJ told him wouldn't that what happened that night on the boat, I will tell you, but I don't trust you. Very interesting, I would say. So, and Macarene would go and tell Lana, what do you mean? And she asked, and he replied with, well, someday you're gonna say something, and I don't want RJ hurt. Forget RJ, y'all. Seriously. And he will also tell her, nobody needs to be hurt anymore. What about the people who know what happened? This is her family that they want answers. So what about Natalie? In the memoir she began, but ultimately deemed too revealing published. Daisy Clover faced every major crisis alone, and there would be nobody to pull her out of trouble. And it felt as if it was a lot of Natasha and Daisy. Natalie had no one to protect her. In life or in death, she struggled alone in the dark sea like a tiny, brave sailboat in her favorite painting. In a courtroom, she kept near her, looking for her worst nightmare, and she was responding to the calls for help. All three men on Natalie's boat that night were should be held accountable for her drowning. She went off to the Splendor after a fight with RJ, so heated that it could be heard on other boats, yet hours passed, and the chilling fact that their silence afterward twines Wagner's Darwin and Walken in a Chekhovian tragedy as a resolution short of a confession. So, we know that, but what do we really know? Well, on a cool November day, 37 years ago, four adults went off for a cruise off the southwest coast of LA aboard Splendor, a 55-foot yacht. Three of those adults would come home safely, back to shore. The fourth would never be home and see her home again. She never worked again or see her children reach adulthood. She would discover floating in the flannel nightgown, socks, and a down jacket the next morning. In this story, the lucky adult, who was the most famous adult of this movie star, Natalie Wood. She was 43 at the time. She was a beloved actress, first capturing national attention in 1947's Miracle on 31st Street, one of my favorite movies of all time. She played the skeptical, precocious Susan Walker, and then a beautiful engineer in such films as the 1961 musical West Side Story, in which she played a graceful Maria. And after her age of 25, she had been nominated for 3 Academy Awards for Best Actress for her leading role in Rebel Without a Cause, Splendor in the Glass, and Love with a Proper Stranger. But perhaps because of her tragic end, when you hear the name Natalie Wood today, you really don't think of her storied career, do you? To wit, there are 38 million Google results for this term, Natalie Wood's death, if that tells you anything. So circumstances surrounding her death remain murky and controversial, but we can agree that that in dying so young, that so mysteriously her talent was denied proper legacy. In 1981, her death was classified as an accident and a probable drowning in the ocean. The prominent LA coroner, Thomas Goichi, cited in his report numerous bruises to the arm and that superficial body sustained. No other, no other trauma noted foul play in suspect. The investigators' report attached to the document said that Wood and a small party, including her husband, had left the Splendor for a restaurant dinner on Catalina Island. About 10 p.m., the can't talk for some reason. The intoxicated group would return to their yacht using its dinghy, Valiant. Ragnar told the investigator that Natalie retired for the night in the couple's cabin about 10:45. But after talking for a while longer with the guest, Natalie's co-stars at the time, Christopher Walken, Wagner went on to the cabin only to find her missing. Hmm. So, Wagner and the other investigators discovered that the dinghy was also missing, and they immediately, unquote, radio for help. Harbor Patrol, private searchers, and eventually the Coast Guard all combed the water in the island coastline, and the Sheriff's Department helicopter eventually spotted Natalie's floating body, who was pronounced dead at 7:44 a.m. on November 29th. Now, her funeral was held December 3rd, showed a devastated, weeping. I don't think he was really that devastated, honestly. Wagner, surrounded by friends, family, and the cream of the entertainment world. Instead of finality, Wood's death only seemed to provoke questions. 3 decades later, in 2011, the LA Coroner's Sheriff's Department reopened the investigation and launched a press in February 2018. Captain Christopher Wagner of the Homicide Department said new witnesses whose with relevant information have been identified in a different timeline has emerged for Natalie's last hours. So, at the February press conference, John Corina, a lieutenant in the LA County Sheriff's Department Homicide Bureau, said that Robert Wagner, 88, was, quote, a person of interest, unquote, in her death, and that they would speak with him and hear his version of events. The new witnesses, he said, were people who moored near Wagner's yacht and heard a couple loudly fighting and calling for help. Suzanne Finstad would go on to say that the case is still open. And she is the author of Natasha, the biography of Natalie Wood. And for those of you who don't know, Natasha was the name of what her Russian family called her. So when she wrote the book, it was published in 2009 and it contained claims and arguments between Wood and Wagner shortly before she was declared missing on the yacht. A source that was the fourth person on the yacht was Dennis Darvin, who is now 70, in a February press conference. Karina said that the witness statements from those have been a couple fighting. Very interesting. And also, Karina added that the department had also talked to witnesses who saw on Catalina Island that weekend, as well as those who knew Wagner and Wood. Some of the details that emerged about have emerged and that the yacht are ugly, with whispers of drunkenness, rage, and infidelity. So, what exactly do we know? I mean, we talked about some of the hidden case details. We've talked about, like, the overview of her childhood and her history, but as we know, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce her name, but the life of Natalie Wood is basically like those dolls, like those wooden dolls, Russian dolls that I'm talking about? Yes, so that's what, exactly. But if you had to pick one doll to find inside over and over again, even those we thought were familiar, the life story of the sparkling would take aback by reality. It comes to show nobody's life is perfect. So she was born Natalia Zorenko, and she was the daughter of Russian immigrants. Um, Her dad was a laborer who had violent alcohol rages, and her mom was a fanciest and abusive taskmaker who had tiny who drove her tiny daughter to become the family breadwinner, according to Finstad's biography. Maria's family had fled to China after the revolution when she was a child, and she would have had her fortune read by a gypsy in Arvin. The fortune teller said that her second child would be a beauty and known throughout the world. But she also said that Maria must beware of dark water. Maria passed on that fear to her second daughter, who was pushing her to fulfill that prophecy. There were some harrowing stories of Maria's stage as a stage mom, and the fact that she was determined that her daughter, after receiving small parts, and would be cast in 1946 film Tomorrow Is Forever, alongside Orson Welles, and the character was an emotionally fragile girl orphaned by Nazis. To win this part, Natalie had to be able to cry on cue, and her mom wasn't sure she could do it all. At the studio, clutching her daughter, Maria's whispered to her to think of death of a family dog, to which she would further that on, and her mom would push her to pull her aside where no one could see her, took a live butterfly out of a jar and the wings off. And she was and say tender-hearted Natasha went into hysterics as her mom called out, "She's ready," grabbing her by the hand, pushing her to the camera. Wood was moving so that the that she want film that she wanted a long-term contract, and she was famously hardworking and learning that not just the lines, but everyone else, and earning that nickname, One Take Natalie. She performed in a dizzying number of movies, including The Ghost of Miss Muir, and she reached her teen years whose brave and friendly dresses she could play younger roles.